The teacher and coach co-planned the observation lesson. They decided the coach would observe the lesson during the second period class and debrief during the fourth period, the teacher's planning period. We now join them during the debrief after the observation lesson. The coach observed the lesson and recorded observations, including what the teacher did, how students responded in relationship to the goal. She included any noticings and wonderings and reflective questions. We joined the teacher and coach during this reflection.
All right, so I'm glad we were able to meet so close to that lesson. So I scripted my observations by listing what you did and what the students were doing, and then how everybody responded is how I recorded my notes. So when I arrived, I noticed your students were seated and you had them in groups of 4 this time.
Yes.
And then they each had a copy of the text they were using for today. They were all reading quietly and marking their text. So it appeared like they were underlining phrases and sentences
Right.
from our plan. So tell me about that part of that lesson.
So I tried to be real purposeful with the grouping based on kind of what we did, what we saw in the writing samples.
Okay.
So had one of each of those students in that group were formed from those other groups.
Okay.
To kind of help and support each other. They were rereading the text and they were underlining, and so each person was responsible for a different thing to underline and code.
Okay.
And so based on that, and that too was kind of to differentiate the lesson a little bit and to hopefully help the ones that were struggling on the previous, so that those kids that were coding different sections could help them once the discussion came out. That's what my hope was. So that's what they were doing.
Gotcha. So that's how you decided which students would code which part.
Exactly. Because some of the coding was more, it was more difficult and it got deeper into the text than some of the more shallow coding. It was a little easier things to find, because I also wanted those kids that were struggling to have some success being able to find some of those things.
Absolutely. Okay, so then we moved to the next part of the lesson we planned. So that got into the small group discussions. So during that period, what I recorded is I noticed that 22 of your 24 students took turns sharing what they coded within their groups.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw that 2 students, the other 2 were observed not sharing. However, they both looked like they were attentive to the rest of the group. I made some noticings about just their body language and the way that they were acting with that group.
Right.
So talk to me about how you're going to check for understanding with those students.
Okay, so when you're the one teaching, you don't notice all of them, when they look like they're participating, so that's a good thing to know, first of all. I think what I'm probably going to do is go back and look at what they've coded in their text. Partly that will let me know if they understood what the task was, and then the second thing will be how they what they were looking at what the responses were in the discussion, to see if they referred back to that. And eventually they're in their writing, and hopefully that will lead to that as well.
Okay, and so then you moved in your lesson. So next, each student was assigned to create 2 or 3 questions that address what they coded. So that was from our plan. And then you modeled an example of how to do that, and then you were circulating around the room while the students worked. So what did you notice as the students were working on those questions?
So 2 things kind of showed up right then. First, I had some students that still needed assistance, so quite possibly I should have modeled more than 1 question. And then second, even with the students that understood and had a better handle, the questions were still very low level, very factual, just based on what they saw in the text. I thought that some of them would be a little deeper than they were. So I found myself having to go from table to table to ask more questions to get, to keep it moving, and to look at the questions they were, to have them revisit the questions somewhat.
And that's a great noticing to have, just knowing that at any point in a lesson, if you see that students aren't responding the way that you like them to, you can take that liberty, just pause the lesson, go back,
Right.
show another model. So that's a great noticing to have that you can use again in another lesson.
Right.
So then how can you use those questions that the students created to deepen their understanding towards working towards that student goal? Because our student goal for our cycle was that students were going to use this collaboration to then deepen their responses and their ability to add that evidence in their writing.
Right. Right, so I collected, this folder has got the kids' questions that they created.
Okay.
So I'm gonna take those home and then, I think for the next piece, I'm going to, ask for some leading questions. And I wrote down a couple of them because I kinda thought you might ask me that. Just and maybe you can offer some more suggestions. So can you go into more detail? What part of the passage supports this idea? What specific words or phrases, can you use? I hope that will provide enough assistance to get them to go deeper and to get that evidence from the text.
Yeah, that's important for students to get that feedback so
Right.
that they know how they can improve it.
Right.
And that'll help work towards that goal.
Okay.
So then at the close of the lesson, you ended the lesson by asking students to review their questions
Right.
For tonight's homework.
Right.
So what are you seeing as the next steps with this lesson?
So I want the questions tomorrow's discussion is going to be total group. So I really want it to be kind of an inquiry type class discussion, using some of the same protocols, but now instead of just with 4, with a whole group.
Okay.
So trying to implement those structures. And I want to, even though I have some interpretive questions that they'll be able to answer different, I want to use some of their questions
Mhm.
embedded in that. So that's why I want them to review it tonight. But then I want to incorporate that. It kind of validates their work and they'll see some of their questions. It's like, oh, that's the one, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also those will lead to the 2 focus questions that will be part of the essay.
Okay. So talk to me about what you've learned about your teaching today.
Not to be afraid to try. I didn't think that they would, collaborate in that group setting where they stayed on task. I thought they'd talk about Friday night and different things, and if they had the expectation and they did. They talked about what I asked them to talk about. So it was just a matter of, some really specific
Mhm.
plans, and they could do it. Even my kids that were struggling could do it. So I know that I'll obviously plan more for this. I also thought the kids were more engaged, so I noticed that, and so I learned that I need to do that because it will increase engagement in the class.
I remember that was one of your fears with
Yeah.
establishing that goal when we started
Right.
the coaching cycle. So, you've been able to work through and see some of the ways that you can embed that into your instruction. So with your teacher goal, we also established that student goal.
Right.
So let's talk about how are we gonna assess that and evaluate that student goal?
So I figured 2 ways. Tomorrow's discussion, I'm setting up a kind of a observation check sheet where I can record their responses, and that's going to be kind of to evaluate just on the spot discussion and whether they can respond, whether they provide any evidence, whether they build on each other's, kind of if they help each other, and then also when they do that essay.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that then it transfers into doing that and using that sorting.
Yeah, and that's what we can do. We'll meet together again
That would be good.
after that lesson, and we'll sort those papers out together, and then we'll look at that growth with that student goal, and then we can plan from that what we can do next.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right,